Hi guys, welcome back. In this video series, we'll be looking at building our .NET MAUI apps, Windows, iOS, and Android apps through Azure DevOps and publishing our build artifacts to Azure DevOps that we can then consume in a release pipeline to push it to the appropriate stores. So in this first video, we'll be mostly focusing on Windows. And then in the subsequent videos, we'll be looking at the Android and iOS parts, as well as designing and releasing these artifacts to the appropriate stores. So the first thing that you want to do is head over to azuremicrosoft.com, products DevOps. I'll drop the link in the description below and click Start Free if you don't have an Azure DevOps account. It won't cost you anything and it lasts a lifetime, and you get 1,800 minutes build time for free every single month. So it should be more than enough for any small team, and they have options to upgrade to parallel pipelines if you do reach that limit, which then gives you unlimited build minutes for a very reasonable price. Okay, so once you've started your account, you can head over to DevOps and create a new project. So I'm just going to call this my pipelines demo. It's going to be a private repository, and I'm going to click create. Great, our project has been created, so you can head over to the repos tab so you can create your first repository on DevOps. I'm going to click here initialize, but I want to set my gitignore to Visual Studio so that it already removes my bin and object folders and all those sorts of things. So I'm just going to click initialize, and it also created a little readme for me. So I'm just going to click here on the clone button to clone this repository that we've just created. Click on the copy button. My preference is Git extensions, but you can use any Git client that you know well. So just go to clone repository. It already pasted the link for me. You can just navigate to where you want your repository to be stored. It will create the subdirectory for you, and you can just click clone. Yes, I want to open this repository, and there we have it. Our brand new repository has been cloned. So I've launched Visual Studio, and I'm just going to create a new blank MAUI project. So you can just search here for MAUI, and what we want is a .NET MAUI app. Next, let's just call this, and I'm gonna store it in that. So now it's in the repository that I've cloned. Next, you can select your .NET version that you want to target there and hit create. So we have a blank MAUI project here. We can just quickly launch it for Windows and just make sure it runs, or you can plug in your Android phone to launch the Android application if you've set developer options on either or. And there we go. Our blank MAUI project has been launched and it is working. So now we've created our project. So I'm just going to commit all these files that were created. So that's on the repository. Great. So we've pushed our sample project to the repository. From here on out, I'm going to create a separate branch, which I'm going to call production. So the idea is that every time code is pushed to this branch, we will execute a production build for our app for all three types of apps, for Windows, Android, and iOS. So I'm just going to click here, create branch. Okay, there we go. And I want to push this to the server. Great. All right, so now that we've created our sample project, we want to go to the Pipelines tab in Azure DevOps and click the Create Pipeline button. it will ask you where is your code located. So this can also be on a GitHub repository or, but yeah, we're going to choose Azure repos Git because it's literally in our repos here and it can already find it over there. So we're going to select that repository. And yeah, it gives you a couple of options to help you get started. So we're going to just use the starter pipeline since it gives us a lot of flexibility to build it in the way that we like it to. So this is the editor that you get inside DevOps to edit your pipeline scripts. They are YAML scripts, which is kind of industry standard for these types of build scripts. So here on the side, you'll also see a Show Assistant button. This essentially gives you a list of quick start options that you can fill in, and then it'll spit out the required code for you. So that can be quite useful in quickly configuring your pipeline. The first thing that we're seeing here is just a comment from Microsoft telling you to go to this link, which is a very useful link. And I'd recommend, if you get stuck, to just first have a look over here because there's so much information on this. The next is a mention of a trigger and there's a main here. So essentially what that means is, like, every time we're pushing code on the main branch, this script will execute. So we'll definitely want to change that, but let's see what our options are if we go to that link and you go to the trigger section. So it gives you a lot of good documentation on that. So one important thing is triggers aren't disabled by default necessarily. So if you don't have that in at all, it will kind of just execute always. So that might be a weird bug that you might chase in the future. So hopefully that saves you some time. So if you don't want this to ever execute automatically, you can set this to none. But we do want it to execute. We want it to execute on our production branch. So let's just go a bit down. So here you can select multiple branches as well. There's also a batch option, which is quite useful if you are on the free accounts and changes are pushed in a batch. It will try and build for them together. So you might save some build minutes. So we'll probably want that to true. So this is a nice little template that we can copy. Come over here. Important thing to note is your YAML scripts are indentation sensitive like Python. So we're going to change the branch to production. Make sure you spell that exactly case sensitive as you created the branch on your Git repo. Next, we can choose the virtual machine that's going to be performing this build. So there's quite a few options for your VMs. So you can just scroll all the way down and you'll see here at the one place there's hosted images link. If you go to that, it gives you the list of VMs that you can target at the top. You can have a Windows server building it, you can use Linux Ubuntu, or have a Mac OS VM that can build for you. So for example, our iOS app will have to build on the Mac OS image, whereas Android, you have a variety of choices, but your Windows app will also be using the Windows image. Let's get started on using the Windows latest one, since we can target both Android and Windows on that VM. Next, you'll see a steps mention, and inside it runs a script just echoing hello world, just as an example. And then there's another step, which is a different script to just also echo some additional lines of text. So an important concept to understand on these steps is it's kind of a tiered system. So on your outermost tier, you have stages. inside your stages, you have jobs, and inside your jobs, you have steps. And each step is the actual piece that you'll be executing, which can be any of these tasks that you see on the side. So it might sound a little bit daunting at first, but essentially it's just different ways of grouping it. And you can, for example, run each stage in a different virtual machine. So the first step to building our Windows.NET app would be to set the .NET version that we'll be using. Unfortunately, this task isn't actually listed in the side panel, but you can just Google that. So the @2 stands for version 2 of this task. So as they make breaking changes to the API of this task, they'll bump the version. So if you look at the documentation, it just gives you some examples on how you can set your .NET version. It's quite a lengthy read, but we don't really need all of that. Essentially, what we want to be setting is the version, this one. So you can copy, actually, let's copy the whole thing, and then we can just remove what we don't need. Okay, so you can just paste it in here and remove all these excessive amount of comments. And we can perhaps add that one and the version as well. So you could specify this right here, which would be 8.x. But a better way than doing that, so that we can update in the future, is opening the library tab down here at the left. So I'm just going to open that in a new tab so that I don't lose my progress in the script. Over here, we can create what's known as a variable group. And let's just call this variable group pipeline variables. And let's add our variable. So this is just going to be .NET version, which is going to be 8.x. You can save this variable group. Now we'll just have to import this. So let's copy that, go back to our script, and then we just want to add a variable step. So it does have some autocomplete, so you can just press tab once it gives you the right suggestion. We want to indent, and then this is going to be a group, and it's called pipeline variables. The variable that we created was .NET version, and the way you reference a variable is with the $sign and in round brackets. So let's copy paste that to make sure we don't make a typo. And then in the future, we can just change this value and without having to update our scripts, and we'll be targeting a new .NET version. So that's quite a powerful little extra tool at our disposal. Great, so now we've set the .NET version, but one thing that you'll notice when you run this pipeline, you won't be able to see exactly what this step is. So there's something that they call a display name, which will just kind of give you a readable name for this step. So we're just going to call this set.NET version. And then we want to run a script to download our MAUI workloads. So in the side panel, you're just going to search for bash, which is a script that can run on all 3 VMs. And we're just going to specify it inline. So you can also have the script in your repository and target to that, or you can set it to inline. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to add that, and I'm going to add a display name to this one as well, which is going to be install MAUI workloads. Great. This script, I'm going to remove this little default section here. So what you want to be calling here is .NET NuGet locals all -- clear. So it just kind of clears our environment. And then we want to do a .NET workload install Android MAUI. So we're also going to be installing the Android workloads, since we can use the same VM to build both Windows and Android. So we save on some build minutes since we only then have to install it once. But you can also spin it up in a different stage, which can be useful if you have the paid for parallel pipelines to get through the builds quicker. So then we have to specify the source. So this is something I'll provide in the description below as well. So you're specifying which .NET version, and that's just like the nougat.org API that is also referencing over there. So that will install the MAUI workloads that we need on this virtual machine. So each time the script runs, it's a brand new VM instance, and you have to install these workloads again. So that's why we have to include this step. All right, and then add another bash script to just display the current working directory's file structure, since I think that's quite useful sometimes to just see, how was it cloned into this repo? What is our current working directory look like, so that we can take it from there. So I'm just going to add an ls, which then will just display the current working directory. And I'll just add a little display name here as well, called show current working directory. So at this point, I think we're at a good stage to do our first run. Let's just change the location where we're saving this script. So I want to put this in a folder called Azure Scripts, just to kind of keep my root directory clean of my repository, and gonna call the script production build.yaml. So let's click save and run, and it's fine. So it just adds your commit message. So it's actually going to commit this script that we wrote now onto our repository. So just click save and run, and there we go. That's our first job executing. Now you'll remember that I said you get stages, and then inside them jobs, and inside them steps, but we never even mentioned the job. So the scripts are smart enough then to just kind of create a job for you. And you'll see it didn't actually run because it still needs access to our variable group. So we can click here on view, and then you can just click on permit. So every time you add a secure file or a new variable group or so, you'll just have to give it access first. And then it starts executing. So it's creating our Windows virtual machine and starting the job. First off, checking out the repository that we created. And you, on the left-hand panel, you can see the display names that we set for each step. So it's now busy with the set.NET version, which we put as 8.x. So it pulled that correctly from our library's variables. Now it's executing installing the MAUI workloads. This will take about 2.5 minutes or so. So that does add a little bit of extra time to your builds. There are ways to kind of cache things between VM instances. So that's something that you could look at if those 2 minutes are extremely crucial to you. But yeah, that is a bit more involved and not in the scope of this video. Great, so the script finished. The install MAUI workloads took about 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And you might be thinking, oh no, I'm losing my 3 minutes. But 1,800 is a lot. I know of companies that's gone a really long time even before they needed to upgrade. So don't be too worried about that. And then also our show current working directory also executed, which you can see over here. But essentially the root of our repository. So if we go to the root to compare it on Windows Explorer, and you'll see the same files, except it doesn't show our gitignore, but it shows our readme and the MAUI pipelines. And remember, we now added this Azure scripts folder as well. So this kind of gives us an idea from where our current build directory is pointed at. But if you cloned multiple repositories in this script, it would put it one directory up. So just something to keep in mind. So your paths might change slightly if you're restoring multiple different repositories in the same script. Great, so let's just then pull this latest code locally as well, just to see the actual files that it created for us. So it pushed it onto the main branch. So we can check that out. And we can go to the folder and we can see our new Azure script folder that it created for us and our YAML script. Now, the online editor is great, but I still prefer using VS Code to do these edits. So I'm going to open this in VS Code. Actually, I want to open the whole folder in VS Code so that I have it as a working directory. There we go. So by default, it doesn't give you any linting, which would obviously be an issue since it's so indentation sensitive. So what you want to do is go to extensions and search for Azure Pipelines and install this first extension that you'll see over here. It is developed by Microsoft, so you know it's well maintained, and it gives you some linting options, and it can link to your organization as well, and yeah, do all sorts of fancy things. I think I'm just scratching the surface of this extension, but it's really useful. So after you've installed that, you will see it still doesn't add your linting options for you. So what we want to do is go down here where in the bottom right corner where it says YAML, and then just click on Azure Pipelines. It will then say select Azure DevOps organization associated with this repository. Select your organization. It's going to load a little bit. You're going to choose your organization. Might ask you a second time for some reason. And then once that is set, you'll start getting the linting. So it also gives you some info if you hover over some things over here, which is quite handy. So getting some info on these specific tasks, and also the autocomplete option. So you can press Control Space and then it gives you the other properties that you can set on each of these steps. So yeah, pretty powerful stuff. And then obviously if you do have an indentation error, it will give you your error warning, then it will highlight your file in red as well. So yeah, pretty powerful stuff. I wish I knew of this tool earlier on in my career, but yeah. Okay, great. So we can now continue writing our script to build our Windows app. So the next step would be to actually perform the build. So it's going to be another bash script. So I'm just going to copy this previous one and then edit it. So I'm going to change the display name to build Windows MAUI app. And we're just going to do a .NET publish command. So I'd almost suggest first trying this out locally in Visual Studio. So if we go to our Visual Studio instance and we write .NET publish, and for our framework we want .NET 8.0-Windows. So if you run it just like this, you'll get an error because relating something to the target version is lower, because it seems by default if you say .NET 8-Windows, it targets Windows 7. So you kind of need to specify the exact version that you want to target. So I'm just going to copy it directly from my CS proj. And then we have a -C to say which configuration we want to build. Is it debug or release build? So it's the equivalent of selecting it in this drop-down menu. So we're just going to do a release build here, since this is going to be our production build. And then We can also specify an output folder. So you can say -- output, and let's just call it publish. So it's going to create a publish folder straight over here. So let's just press enter and see what happens. So it restores our projects. And there we go. So allegedly it created our publish folder inside our project. So we can do explorer dot to missed out the X. Explorer dot to open a Windows Explorer instance over there. So it created our publish folder over here, and here you can see the published content. So that's essentially what we want to be doing on the pipelines, is exactly that command. So you can select all of that we executed successfully locally, and we can take that over to our script, and we can just paste it in here. But we want to make a couple of changes. Firstly, you might want to target your CS project directly, as you might have multiple different projects in your solution, and not all of them are NET 8 Windows. A lot of these could just be normal NET 8 ones, or maybe even NET standard libraries. So you might want to be a bit more specific about your exact project that you would want to build. So if we look at our repository, so on our displaying our current working directory, we saw it was in this directory. So we can go and copy this folder, go in there. Once again, it's a folder with the same name. Go one layer deeper, and in here is our CS proj. So we want to specifically be targeting this CS proj. We have our framework set, we have our configuration set, and our output we might want to change as well, since we want to be publishing this as an artifact that we can consume in our release pipeline. So Azure DevOps has an artifact staging directory that we can use. And I'm just adding a subfolder for Windows over here, since we'll also be building for Android in the same VM instance, so that we don't publish the Windows artifacts as well with the Android one. The step that we will be using to actually publish our Windows artifact is publish build artifacts, which is a common one if you've ever worked with Azure scripts. So we can just quickly Google that, publish build artifacts @1, and you can see kind of the standard things that you get to your disposal. So we can copy that and come back to our script. We can paste it in here, kind of remove all these excessive comments. So it just kind of gives you all the various options that you can have, but it looks quite daunting if there's so much comments all over the place. Great. So by default, this is exactly where it's pointing towards, path to publish this artifact staging directory. But we created our little subfolder in there. So we actually want to be publishing from that folder. And then it asks you, what do you want this artifact to be named? So I'm just going to call it Windows, since it's our Windows build. And you don't even need this since it's already container by default. So nice and short. We might also just want to add a display name over here called publish Windows app to artifacts. So we can save this. And if you recall correctly, we set the trigger to our production branch. So I'm going to push this to main, and then we expect no builds to be kicked off because it's not on our production branch. So I'm just going to say add Windows MAUI build step and Windows publish artifacts. I'm going to commit and push that. If we go to DevOps now, even though it's been pushed, we won't see any, we won't be seeing any builds being kicked off because it's not on our production branch. Great, so if we then merge the main branch into our production branch, and we push this change to the server, then we expect a build to be kicked off. Okay, so let's just go to pipelines, and there you can see the new build is pending. It's currently queued, just waiting to start the virtual machine, and there we go. Our build has automatically been kicked off. Great, so our Windows build step is being executed. It correctly saw the CS approach. It's targeting our Windows 10 framework. It set our configuration to release. And here you can see the path that it actually is going to be outputting our Windows build, which is that artifact staging directory with our Windows subfolder. It's fine that the slashes are in different directions. It will still resolve that correctly. And our build succeeded successfully. So it finished the whole Windows build in about a minute and a half. And then it published the artifacts to the file container. And yeah, those post jobs you don't have to worry about those. And if we just go back here and you look here under the related section, you'll see one published. So if you go in there, then you'll see our artifact that was published for Windows, and it contains all our required files over here. And well done. You've successfully built a Windows MAUI app through Azure DevOps pipelines and published its artifact. So next we'll be looking at building our Android app and also publishing it into its own container.